Hi, my name is Robert. This video is designed to give you step-by-step detailed instructions on completing the task at hand. Please read the comments in the About section of this video. It has valuable information and updates. My YouTube channel has a disclaimer video that I encourage you to watch. And please like, share, and subscribe. I hope you found what you're looking for. Thank you very much for watching. In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the starter on a 2005 Honda Accord. It's a inline 4 2.4 liter motor, or iVtec technology motor. It's the same in a lot of these Honda Accords and some of your Acura TSXs. Got a call from my sister a few days ago. She said that her car was having starting issues. She thought her battery was draining down because the car was cranking a lot slower than normal. As a starter motor wears out, it will crank slower as the motor starts to die. You have two issues that you normally deal with starters. One is the motor actually dies, and the other is the solenoid actually gives out. When you turn the key to start the car, you'll hear a click if the starter is bad. The click is the solenoid engaging, which gives power to the starter for the starter to start. Turn it. If the solenoid is bad, you'll never hear a click, or you'll never hear the starter. If the starter doesn't turn but you hear the click, the motor is probably stuck, locked up, or has gone out in the starter. Now, when you're trying to start the car, you have several things that could cause it not to start. But the key to troubleshooting is determine whether or not the car is cranking or not. Cranking simply means that the motor is turning over, the starter is engaged, and that part is working, but the car is not running when you let the key go. It just immediately dies back out. That means the car is cranking but not running. If you turn the key and nothing happens, or you hear rapid clicking, chances are you have a weak or dead battery. If you turn the key and you hear one click and nothing happens, more than likely you have a starter issue, if you have determined and verified that the battery is strong enough to start the car. Now, if you have a starter that's going out in the car, it normally gives you a warning. It'll crank sometimes it won't, and the no cranking problem will become more and more. It'll happen more frequently, So you go to start the car, nothing happens. You turn the key off, you try it again. That'll happen more and more as the starter motor goes bad. Now, these motors sometimes get a dead spot, and when you turn the key, if it's at the dead spot, it won't get going even though the solenoid engaged. Sometimes tapping on the starter can help them crank the motor again and get you on your way. Now, although the starter is a critical part of starting the car and getting you on your way, it's not a sensitive part of the vehicle like an alternator is, or a fuel pump is, or some other electronic component. So I do not have a problem with installing aftermarket starters as I would an alternator or something like that. So a couple days ago, I came and checked the car. I told my sister her starter was going out. I recommended that she get AAA in case it locked up on her somewhere and she couldn't get it started. I showed her where the starter was, and like the very next day, she got stuck at work and the car would not start. So she called me. I went to go get her. I opened the hood. I had her turn the key, and I tapped on the starter with a metal object, and that got the starter going where she started the car. And as you can now see, she got the car home and in her garage. So this is the normal view of the motor. It's got these couple of plastic covers on them. And if you look down past the intake manifold, the starter is down there. It has a 4.3 number on it. So if you ever are turning your key, you hear a click, but you don't hear the car crank, you can have somebody hold the key. And I took this tool that's from the jack, I stuck it down through there, and I tapped on the starter a couple times like that while she turned the key, and it fired right up. That may get you home. It's a temporary fix. Work on getting your starter replaced. Now, a starter is one of the most powerful things on your motor. Those things provide a lot of torque. They're very powerful motors. I don't recommend you try to hold them in your hand and test them, because they can jump out of your hand and fall down and hurt somebody or hurt yourself. So take them to somewhere and have them bench tested if you want to get them tested. But an intermittent starter may start 8 times and not start the 9th, or it may start 4 times and not start the 5th. So starters, when they go out, they're intermittent. I'm going to go ahead and see if this car will start and turn it around so that I can go ahead and replace the starter. Now, the other issue that people have with starters is if the solenoid goes out. So the starter has a solenoid and the starter has a motor. If the solenoid goes out, you won't even hear a click when you start the car or try to start the car. Just nothing will happen. If your battery power is good and your cables are good and you don't hear that click, either you got a bad ignition switch or the solenoid on the starter, more than likely that solenoid on the starter. And that's part of the starter. And what some people do is they actually jump electrical connectors on the starter to get the starter going. That's probably impossible on this vehicle, since it's almost impossible to reach the starter, but that is an option that some people do when trying to get a starter going with the a no start condition. Personally, I've never got one going like that. I'm a guy that don't want to get electrocuted. So what I normally do is I'll tap on the starter. If I can't get it started that way, we need to call a tow truck, you know. So let me see if the car will start and get it turned around. Again, this car was experiencing slower cranking and intermittent cranking. I think the solenoid is good and the motor's going bad. It may or may not start, but if it doesn't start, you'll probably hear a click when I turn the key. So I'm going to try to be quiet, see if you can hear the click, and go from there if it doesn't start. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn the key. Either the car is going to start or you're going to hear the click. Okay, it worked that time, so you didn't get to hear the click, but I'm going to go ahead and turn it around because it's intermittent. Alright, to have easy access to the starter, I've heard that you can do this without this. What I'm about to tell you is you need to remove the intake manifold. The intake manifold is here. It bolts part to this other part of the manifold on the motor. Then your fuel rail is behind that. So you have to take this front manifold off. You have a few connections. You got your air tube. You got your throttle body, which is electronic there. You have a bracket down low on it. You got these 5 bolts here. So you take those tubes and things loose. Most people say you lean it toward the radiator, and then you can reach the starter and get the couple of bolts out the starter and go from there. Of course, if you're going to buy a starter at a local shop, most of them have a core, so you want to go ahead and pull the starter before you go to the auto parts store. Anytime you break the intake manifold loose, there's a gasket there, so you want to also purchase a gasket. So let me go ahead and get started. Here are the tools and equipment I use to change the starter. Now, if this is your only vehicle and you have no other way to get back and forth to the parts store, you'll have to buy your starter and your intake manifold gasket before you tear things loose, and then take your starter to the parts store to get your core refund, which is probably $30, $40. Now, one of these lines house coolant. I'm not sure which one, maybe more than one. So if you want, you could drain the radiator into a pan. That will more than likely drain off the coolant out of those lines. Not 100% sure. Or you can just try to plug the line when you find which ones have coolant, so that you can not spill too much coolant on the ground and have to add coolant or recapture coolant. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is take out these two bolts here and take this cover off, which I did last night, and then I put the two bolts back there so that I won't lose them. Next thing I'm going to do is disconnect the negative and the positive cables from the battery, because I have a little bit of a fear about getting shocked, which I hope most people do. And the battery has a direct connection to the starter. People say you can remove the negative and that's good enough, but I think if you have the positive connected and you got a wrench on the starter positive bolt and you somehow ground that out, you may get shocked. So I always remove the positive when I'm dealing with the starter and the alternator. Now, just out of curiosity, I disconnected the negative battery post, and I checked for 12 volts between the battery positive and another ground on the car, and I only got like 1 volt. So they may be right about disconnecting the ground is enough, but I'm going to disconnect the positive anyway. Having these battery terminals disconnected is a good opportunity and a time to clean your battery post, so when you put that stuff back together, you got a clean, fresh start. The next thing I'm going to do is remove this tube. So I'm going to unplug this throttle body, take this wire out of here. I'm going to loosen this clamp. I'm going to pull this tube off of here and disconnect this stuff off the back here and unplug this intake tube from the air box. Okay, I had a little squeeze clamp there. I squeezed with my fingers to get it pulled off of that sensor there. This back is like a little spring tension thing, nothing really to take off, and worked it off of the air box, and everything else just pulled off. Sometimes you have to wiggle the tubes and connectors to get them off. Now, this is a good time to check your air box to see if it has a good filter in there, because if the filter's dirty, you want to go ahead and replace that as well. Most of these electrical connectors have a little release tab on them. I'm going to go ahead and undo this wire harness from the intake manifold and throttle body. Normally that stuff is kind of tight, and I don't want to be pulling on wires and stuff when I try to tilt that intake manifold forward. So you squeeze that and then work the plug off like that. I'm going to take this bolt out here so I can get this harness loose from there. Remove that bolt right there. And then there's a couple of push tabs on these wire straps that I'm going to take loose. And there's a plug down there that I'm going to unplug as well. So let me go ahead and unplug these electrical connectors. That lower electrical connection down there is a little stubborn, so I'm going to leave it on there for now. See if this is enough slack to get my intake manifold to drop forward. Next, I'm going to squeeze the clamp, take this hose loose, this little hose loose here, this hose loose here, and this fourth hose loose here, and maybe taking those 4 loose will give me enough slack to drop that manifold forward. Alright, when I pulled these 2 hoses loose from right at the throttle body switch, these 2 did let a little coolant out. The top one let a little out. The bottom one seemed to want to keep draining out. So I took it and tucked it under there and pushed this down a little bit so that it would hold that hose there and quit leaking out coolant. This car is cold, so it don't have any pressure in the coolant. I also put a drip pan under there to catch any coolant that might spill. If the coolant looks clean, I'll go ahead and recycle it. If not, I'll see how much coolant that is and probably add back distilled water. Next thing I did was pull these 3 bolts on the lower side of the manifold and the 2 nuts on the top side. I don't know the torque value for those, so I actually used my torque wrench to break those loose, and it seems like they were all tightened at 25 foot-pounds. How I did that was I put my 12 millimeter on there, I put it on the nut, and I put pressure on it until it broke loose. And like I said, it was like 25 foot-pounds. So that's what I'm going to torque those back onto, unless I find some other proper torque value for that intake manifold. The next thing I did, there's a bracket down low on the intake manifold. You can see the bracket here and the bolt there. I broke that bolt loose and I'm going to remove it. It's also 12 millimeter, probably torqued at the same value. It's loose. I'm going to go ahead and pull that out. So I set these bolts aside in order so I can remember how they go back in. And as you can see, that 12 millimeter bolt is out of that lower bracket. Now I should be able to work this intake manifold off and swing it forward out of my way so that I can reach the starter. I got one more wire harness clip that I need to get loose right there. So I'm going to use my hook nose, needle nose pliers to get on that and bump that loose. So here's the pliers I use to get those loose. Now with the manifold loose, don't pull too hard because you got a little tube there that needs to be disconnected from that clip. And then there's a tube on the back of the manifold that you need to reach back there and twist off and unplug so you don't damage those vacuum lines. Okay, now that I have the manifold swung open and away from the motor, you can see the intake manifold gasket that should be replaced there. And you have a clear view of the starter. So the first thing I'm going to do is reach down here and unplug the wire that goes to the solenoid. Solenoid's been built in. You can rock this back and forth and pop this rubber boot off of there. I guess I'm going to get a flat tip screwdriver, pop that off because the boot's probably holding tighter than the wire is. Now I don't want to break the wire. Okay, I used a screwdriver, broke the boot loose, and the wire pulled right off. Next, I'm going to pull the boot up off of this connector here, and this is your main power source for the starter. Let me work that off with both hands and then put a socket on that and remove that bolt. Okay, I got the bolt off the starter wire. Now I'm going to knock this clip out of this bracket on the back of the starter and make sure I don't damage that oil sensor back there. So I'm going to go ahead and squeeze that together and push that wire clamp loose. I went ahead and pulled that plug off of that sensor going into the block just to get it out of my way so I could move the wire harness a little bit. The next thing I'm going to do is take this bolt out. It holds the starter in, and then the next bolt is down there. That's a 17 millimeter, and I think this one is probably a 14 millimeter. Okay, I got both bolts out. As you can see, the starter is falling away from the motor and transmission, so you can pull it out and lift it out past the manifold. And that lower bolt is a little awkward to reach, so I used a little screwdriver and swivel on it once it was loose to screw it out. I recommend taking the lower bolt out first. Okay, now that the starter's out, I'm going to go ahead and go to the auto parts store and get a replacement and go ahead back in with it. Here you can see the teeth of the starter that engages. The solenoid powers the starter and sends power to this clutch thing, and this shoots out forward and it engages in the transmission flywheel and cranks the motor. That's the hole that the starter came out of, and you can see the flywheel that's mounted on the back of the motor hooked up to the torque converter that the starter turns and makes the motor start its rotation to start. Next thing you want to do is take an 8 millimeter and remove your bracket from the back of the starter for your wire harness and swap that over to your new starter. I'm at the store, made a mistake, told the guy that the car was a 1995 instead of a 2005, so I almost walked away with the wrong starter, but it looked different. So we checked the 2005 starter and it will still look wrong, so I asked for the Acura 2.4 starter, and that one is the same as this one. So If for some reason the Acura starter doesn't pull up properly, ask for the Acura starter and it will. Okay, here's the starter. I had it tested at the shop. It already had the bracket on the back of it, so I didn't have to fool with that. And they tested it for me. So I'm going to cut this off, put it in place, start that top bolt, then start the bottom bolt, then tighten those two bolts down. Since the starter is something that you don't want to come out often, I put some medium strength thread locks on the two mounting bolts. I'm going to try to torque that top one down to, since it's a 14 millimeter, I'm going to try to torque it down to 25 foot-pounds, and that lower one I'm going to try to torque to 35 foot-pounds. Now when you're torquing these bolts down, you got to keep in mind that you're torquing these bolts into aluminum, so you don't want to strip them, because if you strip them, you're going to have a mess on your hands, and they're being torqued through the motor into the transmission. So don't over tighten them, because you don't want to strip them. Next, I'm going to plug my wire back into that sensor. I'm going to plug this wire in, and I'm going to hook this wire over here and hook it on and tighten it down with that 12 millimeter. Okay, I purchased my intake manifold gasket from AutoZone. It actually came with two, so I'm going to use the one that matches the one I removed. They're Fail Pro gaskets. I don't think it's rocket science. They should be fine. The dealer wanted, I think, $35 for them, and I got two for $25 at AutoZone. Not sure if it matters which way it goes on, but I'm putting the ridges out. So now I'm going to set the intake manifold in place after I hook this tube back up and put this back in its bracket, and I'm going to put the bolts in place, snug them down, and not tighten any of them until I'm ready to tighten all of them. Okay, I torqued these intake manifold bolts down. This one first, this one, then this one, then that one, then that one, and I tightened down the bottom bracket bolt pretty good. Next, I'm going to secure these wire harness back in their respective clip holes. Insert this bolt back in this wire harness there, and I'm going to connect this electrical connector and that electrical connector, and put this electrical connector back in this slot there. Okay, I put the hose in place there, put the clamp in place, slid it back in the bracket. I put this hose in place there, put the clamp back in place. I put the two coolant hoses back in place and slid their clamps back in place. Next, I'm going to put the intake hose in place, put this on. This one presses on. I think this has a little clamp maybe on it on the air box. Squeeze this on, plug it on here. Okay, I tighten that clamp down, not too tight. I ain't trying to tear into the rubber. I got the hose hooked up on the back. I got that bracket worked in, and the little clamp on there, I worked it in place properly with a screwdriver. And it looks like somebody broke some kind of tab that this is supposed to be clipped in here, but everything looks in place. I should be good to go. So next I'm going to put this cover back on top of here. So I got these two bolts here that I took off last night. Let me put that cover in place. Next thing I'm going to do is hook up my battery cables. Now I see how much coolant I lost. It looks like about 3 or 4 ounces. So I'll add coolant back into the system, 3 or 4 ounces, or just add distilled water. I'm not going to put this in there because some dirt washed down into it. It's a good time to clean the battery posts, like I said. And if you have that spray to protect them from moisture, go ahead and spray them. I should be good to go. Let me see if the car starts. Okay, I'm going to stick the key in ignition and see if it starts. Now, I'm not real big on starting the car, letting it run 5 seconds, and shutting it back off. That's not good to dump all that fuel in it and then shut it off. So I'm not going to start it 5 or 6 times or nothing like that. I'm going to start it. If it starts, I know the starter's working, and that's going to be that. So cranked up and it fired up strong, so I'm done. If you feel that this information was beneficial, please like it and share it with your social media friends. You can also subscribe to my channel so that you can get notification of future videos that I post. Visit my channel. I have all types of do-it-yourself videos there. You can leave questions here, and I'll try to respond to them as quick as possible. You can also visit my website at robertspinner.com. Thanks again for watching.